and a privilege to be on air with you today on this second day of our illuminated holiday of Hanukkah. And I have you on Facebook Live as well. And I'm very excited today because I want to talk to you about the transformation of Hanukkah as we have seen it in our own lifetime. I know that you're a little bit older than me, Martin, and you surely remember that a few decades ago, Hanukkah was not nearly the kind of holiday it has become today in the public eye, and specifically in the free world, in the United States, in Canada, and in Western Europe.
You're right. I do remember it was much more low-key, although, for one thing, it did seem to be more widespread, known among the general population than, say, Purim or other festivals. But now, basically, everybody knows about it, and I think in no small part to the Chabad movement.
Well, that's 1,000% true, and I think that there will always be those who try to reinvent history or try to claim paternity for success. But really, this is entirely demonstrable, especially because it is the large menorah lightings that have made a world of difference in putting Hanukkah on front stage of the world. And for many years, probably more than 2.5 or 3 decades, the Jewish establishment fought the public menorahs in court, and even went to the Supreme Court. The Washington-based lawyer Nathan Lewin was the go-to representative for the Chabad movement. I remember vividly a case in Pittsburgh that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and Lubavitch argued the case that this was not an infringement on the separation of church and state, and that it was a good thing. I remember as a yeshiva student in 1991 in Los Angeles, where I was at the time studying, I remember a very well-known Reform rabbi publishing an article in one of the major papers, and the headline was, "It's time to stop Chabad." And it was an article about the public menorah in Beverly Hills, which is a replica of the giant menorah that's in the Midtown Manhattan or on Fifth Avenue, and the whole article was attacking Chabad for using a tax charitable number to publicize the messages of Hanukkah and invite people to the menorah lighting. And he maintained that this was a terrible ripping apart of what you might call successful American Jewish life. And I remember at the time, I'm there. This is going on. I'm visiting people to put on tefillin with them as a yeshiva student on Avenue of the Stars. I used to visit a number of offices, and this was the big topic of conversation. And the next week, true to form, Rabbi Shlomo Kunin, who is the chief Chabad representative in the state of California, published an article in the same periodical with the headline, "It's time to support Chabad." And he talked about how powerful the menorah lightings were and how many lives were touched, and how this was a time when Jewish people needed to be able to raise their head with a sense of pride and joy in their heritage and legacy. And, all of that opposition has faded. It's almost hard for me to believe this, but on X and on social media over the last couple of days, I've seen some of the leaders of the far left Jewish establishment publicly acknowledging we were wrong. Chabad had it right.
Wow. I think that is truly a sign of the coming of the Mashiach, if nothing else.
I hope it's a sign of the coming of Mashiach. But, in today's day and age, menorahs are radiating everywhere, from Toronto to Tokyo. Whether you're across from the Plaza Hotel on Fifth Avenue, where you see the world's largest menorah, they ever wanted it to be that way. He wanted New York City to have the world's largest menorah. And to the White House, to the Eiffel Tower in Paris, to Ottawa. We are talking about a veritable revolution that has taken place in the Jewish world. By and large, Hanukkah was seen by most Jewish people as something that took place behind drawn shades. In antiquity, when the holiday of Hanukkah was first instituted by our sages, it was all about the publicity of Hanukkah, the idea of Parsume Nisa, publicizing the miracle and creating a very public sense of God consciousness and awareness of God's presence and his many miracles. But when we were exiled from the land of Israel 1954 years ago, and as we began to live in a perpetual state of persecution, sometimes it was better, oftentimes it was worse, the menorah went indoors. We were no longer able to put the menorah at our doors. Some people put the menorahs in the windows, and many people simply took the menorah indoors to the dining room table. Hanukkah continued to be celebrated by the family, as it should be, but its public persona, by and large, had faded. And this went on for millennia. And so in the early 1970s, the Rebbe starts to create literally a storm of excitement about Hanukkah. And this is in 1973. It's Yud Tes Kislev, which is called the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. We talked about that together on air. And then on the Shabbat that followed on Chav Kislev, the Rebbe spoke very, very strongly, demanding of his Chassidim that we bring about a sea change, and that Hanukkah would reappropriate its original persona, its public persona, that would be in the public eye, not just in the windows of American Jewish homes and Jewish neighborhoods because we could, but rather we would take Hanukkah to the streets, and we would ensure that people who don't have menorahs have an opportunity to kindle menorahs. And the Rebbe said he was going to leave it to Hasidim, and he expected them to pull out all stops and figure this out. Saturday night, Matzai Shabbos of December 15th, 1973, a major meeting takes place in 770 at Lubavitch World Headquarters. There are dozens of Hasidic activists who attend, and they're racking their brains, what do we do to respond to the Rebbe's call? And amongst the ideas that came up was the creation of a cheap and easy to distribute menorah. Now, I was only 2 years old at the time, so I can't tell you that I have a recollection of this, but it was something that was talked about in the family. They ended up reaching out to a man whose name was Tibor Cooperstein. Now, I knew Tibor Cooperstein because Tibor Cooperstein is my bubby Hechdaleh Shalom's first cousin. Tibor's mother and my great-grandmother were sisters. And Tibor is a Holocaust survivor. My great-grandmother had 11 siblings. There were only 2 sisters and 1 brother who survived. Everybody else was murdered along with her parents. My grandmother had very, very, very small family as a result of the Holocaust. And Tibor was her cousin, her one cousin that she had. And Tibor had a terrible tragedy in his family. He had a son who was, to quote the vernacular, the language people use, in the wrong place at the wrong time. Of course, we know everything's Hashgacha Prata, so we don't understand the ways of Hashem. He was in a pharmacy. There was a holdup, and in this botched robbery, he lost his life. I don't think he was even 20 years old. That was Tibor's son, and Tibor was a broken man. And then the Lubavitchers came to him, Rabbi David Raskin of the Lubavitch Youth Organization. He said, we're looking for a metal stamper, and we want to produce 10,000 tin menorahs. So Tibor rolled his sleeves up, and he said, 1 second, you're making this in order to distribute it to people? He was, at the time, fulfilling a number of U.S. military contracts. He put everything on hold, and they opened the factory for 24 hours a day. During the course of that Hanukkah, this is Hanukkah 1973. Now, you remember this. I don't. I was a child. You remember the state of demoralization that the Jewish people were in, reeling from the terrible tragedy of the Yom Kippur War. Yes, we bounced back, but those first few days were very, very frightening. And it seemed as if the survival of the state of Israel itself was imperiled. And the 2,600 casualties, the broken families, the widows, the orphans. The Jewish people were not in a buoyant state. Perhaps similar to the way we are now, reeling from the terrible events of October 7th. And the Rebbe said that he wanted to see menorahs lit up everywhere. During the course of that Hanukkah, Cousin Tibi produced no less than 60,000 tin menorahs. I remember these tin menorahs. They're much heavier than the menorahs we distribute today. Today we've perfected the art. And there wasn't a single menorah left at the end of Hanukkah. I was a yeshiva student in the early 1980s, and I spent my Hanukkahs on the streets of Midtown Manhattan distributing menorahs. Every night of Hanukkah, we'd light the menorah in our own homes, and this is funny. I'll share with you a personal little vignette. Every class in yeshiva would have their own menorah car. I raised the money. I was in charge of the Mivtzoyim for 2 years, and that meant there was nobody gave you anything. This was the Rebbe's genius. He inspired children. I was 14, 15 years old, and my friends and I went out literally collecting dollar by dollar, and we put something together like $400, which is what it cost in those days to rent a station wagon. This is before minivans were around, or minivans were just making their debut, and we rented a station wagon. And we constructed a menorah, and this was done in all of the high schools, the Chabad high schools. We're all doing the same thing. Every class would do a menorah car or 2 menorah cars. We got an older student to rent the car for us, and that was our mitzvah mobile. And we'd go with this menorah. We put speakers on the top. And I remember one of my friends became an expert in wiring the speakers and using the lighter of the car. And we drive through the New York metropolitan area, blasting Hasidic music, and we'd go to shopping malls and we distribute menorahs. And this went on from when I was 14 years old till I was 20, and there we are when I'm a 20-year-old yeshiva student, and I'm in Los Angeles. And now Hanukkah has very much developed over the course of the 80s. Public menorahs are everywhere now, and many of the cases that were brought against Chabad were struck down by their early 1990s. And I have this vivid memory. I'm in West Hollywood. I think I was in front of a Ralph's, and I'm looking for Jewish people who don't have a menorah. And I go over to a fellow and I say, "Excuse me, sir, Happy Hanukkah, are you Jewish?" And he just looks at me and he says, "You got me last night in Manhattan. I have a menorah already." That was like, we're talking 1991. Like there's a lot has changed since. Chabad is enormous in comparison with then. There were a few hundred students. Today we have a few thousand yeshiva students around the world that are doing this. But that was the coolest thing. Here I am on the West Coast, and I meet a Jew on the East Coast. It's the third night of Hanukkah, and he says, "You got me last night in Midtown Manhattan." And I had to chuckle because a year earlier, I was one of those students on the streets of Manhattan. And you know something, Martin? I'll never forget those nights. They were freezing cold. We were so cold, but we were so motivated and warmed by the Rebbe's call to touch the souls of other Jewish people in the loudest and proudest way we could. And that was formative. It made me who I am. It made my colleagues who I am. I have friends around the world who continue to do the Rebbe's work. And the amazing thing is that, Baruch Hashem, we all are blessed with children who have married, who are doing the same thing. And this is incredible. We're talking about a third generation now of Chabad Lubavitch Hasidim, inspired by the Rebbe's calling, inspired by the Rebbe's vision, inspired by the sense of mission and purpose that the Rebbe implanted within us to make a difference and to illuminate the lives of others. When all this was going on in North America and in Europe, in Israel, especially in 1973, Chabad pulled out all stops. And at that time, and I've heard this from Hasidim who were there, the IDF was flying Hasidim on military transports to bases across the Suez, deep in the Sinai, all the way up north to the Syrian border. And the yeshiva students spent their time going from tent to tent, enclave to enclave of Israeli soldiers, lighting the menorah, distributing sufganiyot, singing, dancing, bringing the joy of Hanukkah to soldiers who were on, as we say, the cutting edge, risking their lives. And the Rebbe had a tremendous amount of nachas, of joy from this. And it's interesting. The first public menorah it's all students. You're talking about a Rebbe who is in his late 70s, early 80s, who is uplifting and inspiring teenagers. I was one of those teenagers a decade later, but in 1974, one of those teenagers, his name is Rabbi Shmuel Lipsker. He today works for Kol Chabad. He's one of the senior executives at the world's oldest continuous charity supporting the poor in Israel. It is the largest NGO in the state of Israel today. We talked about this many times, Kol Chabad. So Rabbi Shmuel Lipsker recalls that he and a couple of yeshiva students were at the corner of 5th Avenue and 47th Street, and they're there with their menorahs. They're distributing menorahs, and they needed a way to create like some kind of attention, some kind of to grab the attention of the thousands of New Yorkers who are rushing by. And so they constructed out of 2x4s a little menorah, and with 3 cinder blocks, held it in place. They got on a number 3 train. They headed off to Manhattan with their little menorah, set it up, and they announced on the loudspeaker that at 5 p.m. there was going to be a menorah lighting. Now, this is before public menorah lightings existed. Nobody ever did this. This had never been done in history. The Rebbe reimagined the idea of what we call takanat Beit HaKnesset, the menorah lit in the public square, in a manner that could attract people in the street. And they got a huge crowd. Like hundreds of New Yorkers stopped, and they lit the menorah, and then they distributed menorahs. A year later, Rabbi Avram Shem Tov, who was the senior Chabad representative in Philadelphia, sets up a 4-foot menorah at Independence Mall, just across from the Liberty Bell. And that was the first official public menorah lighting. And a year after that, in 1975, Chabad's representative in San Francisco, Rabbi Chaim Yitzchak Drizin, and a legendary rock promoter teamed up to construct the world's first giant menorah. It still goes up in Union Square in San Francisco. It was a 25-foot mahogany menorah, and literally this was people who wanted to make a difference, and look at the amazing things that have happened ever since. The Rebbe wrote in a 1980 letter that was addressed to participants of the public Hanukkah menorah lighting in the United States. He wrote, and I'm quoting, he wrote that the message of the Hanukkah lights will illuminate the everyday life of everyone personally and of the society at large for a brighter life in every respect, both materially and spiritually. What an incredible vision. Look at the way things have changed in our world. Think about the way Hanukkah is celebrated today and how many people are moved and uplifted and touched by menorah lightings. I have to tell you, Martin, like even in my little personal life, I've had the privilege of being right at the foundation, at the beginnings of things that are happening across our city. I had the privilege of suggesting to York Regional Police just a few months after I was sworn in as a chaplain that we should have a public menorah lighting. And I remember colleagues of mine laughing at me and saying, public menorah lighting at a police station? Like, seriously, what are you doing? That doesn't even make any sense. Well, the menorah lightings happened year after year after year, and we had many people attending. You know, it's funny. York Regional Police does menorah lightings. They didn't even invite me anymore. And now I've moved on to the OPP, and we're having a
You're going to do the RCMP next?
Well, you know what? It's funny you should say that, Martin, because I am actually in talks already with putting up menorahs at RCMP for next year. I can't believe you said that. But we're having for the first time ever now, we're going to have the menorah lightings that we've started at the OPP are going to be broadcast live on Chabad.
So remind everybody, if you'd like to comment on any of this or ask Rabbi Kaplan anything, please give us a call. The number here is 416-870-1007. And while I've got your attention here, I would like to remind you, if you'd like to advertise or sponsor anybody, you can sponsor Rabbi Kaplan too, or just promote your business, give us a call, or you can connect with me at m.abeles@chinradio.com. Okay, Rabbi Kaplan, let's continue here.
And Martin is the man. So I want to take the opportunity to thank you and thank whoever supports what you're doing, carrying on the legacy of Zelda. And you know that Zelda was insistent that I put up a large menorah at Chin Radio, which I had the privilege of kindling a number of times, many times in fact. And I know this year I'm not going to be at Chin Radio because I'm at the city of Vaughan, which is the menorah lighter that I started, Baruch Hashem, with God's grace. I had the privilege of establishing that menorah some 20 years ago, and I continue to preside over that menorah lighting every single year. It's one of my great privileges here as a citizen of the city of Vaughan. But the menorah lighting that we're doing on Monday, that's why I can't come to Chin Radio this year because of the tight schedule. The menorah lighting right after we're at the city, we're going to be lighting the menorah. You know, starting our ceremony at 3:30. We'll light the menorah at about 4, which is the earliest time you can light a menorah. And then I head up with my good friend Dr. Obi Zeidenberg to the OPP. And 2 years ago, we had the world's first menorah lighting at OPP headquarters. Last year, we were privileged at the commissioner's suggestion and at our nudging and pushing things along, to have menorahs set up at all of the regional headquarters across the province of Ontario. And this year, Baruch Hashem, once again, we're going to be lighting a menorah at headquarters. at all of the regional headquarters, which are 6 other locations, and we're doing it in a live stream from location to location, as menorahs will be lit from Aurelia all the way up to Thunder Bay. And this year it'll be streamed live on the world's largest Jewish website, which is Chabad.org. And this is all very exciting. It's very exciting and it's uplifting. And as you said, the message of Hanukkah is to keep growing, not to be satisfied with successes of the past. We should always be happy, as the Rebbe once told somebody. He said, "I'm always happy, I'm never satisfied." And the message of Hanukkah is never, ever to be satisfied with past accomplishments. We can take joy, have nachas from past accomplishments, and we can be inspired by them, knowing that if we do our part, amazing things can happen. And look where this all started. You have a shliach in San Francisco who's racking his brains and thinking, what can he do? And I'm quoting Rabbi Chaim Yitzchak Drizin. He said, I was simply thinking, like any shliach, what can I do to uplift my city and create a Kiddush Hashem? The sanctification of Hashem's name. And he had a friend whose name was Putterman, and Putterman introduced him to Bill Graham, who was a rock impresario or something. I'm not even sure how you pronounce that. He was a rock promoter. He promoted Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones, the Grateful Dead. He's a Jewish fellow. There was Bill Graham. In fact, the menorah has been renamed since his tragic passing in a helicopter accident, the Bill Graham menorah. They came up with that idea. And the Rebbe was very happy with it. He said he was going to put it into the hands of Hasidim. And this is the way the Rebbe was. He didn't legislate. He didn't tell us what to do. He told us we needed to do. And then he said, figure it out. Take ownership of it. I have a memory as a child, Martin. This must be 1976. That's going to be my guess. At the time, we're living in Lakewood, New Jersey. And the Rebbe is speaking about going out and bringing the light of Hanukkah. And my father says to me, and remember, I'm just a kid. I'm 6 years old. And he says to me, we're going to go visit the hospitals. And we're going to light the menorah in the hospitals and old age homes. And I remember as a child going with my father. I think my brother came along with us. And I remember going from hospital bed to hospital bed. You could light a menorah these days in hospitals. Kind of funny. And I remember it's stayed with me ever since. Elderly people who were so lonely on Hanukkah. And I remember the tears that they cried. I remember the happiness that we caused.
I can imagine how moving that must have been.
It was, you know what? It was so moving to me that it stayed with me since 1976. I still recall that. I remember one particular man who was I could understand that he was a survivor. I didn't even know what that meant at the time, but I understood that he was a survivor and that he had lost his family and lived a very tragic life, and he had tears streaming down his face. And my father said to me, "We're going to sing." And I remember being so shy, and my father encouraging me, and I remember singing Motzor, and the emotion that it engendered in this fellow made a tremendous impression on me that I remember until this very day. So this was the kinds of things that have gone on over the last 50 years. And I'll go out on a limb, Martin, and say that the Rebbe didn't only transform Hanukkah, but by virtue of Hanukkah, the Rebbe really transformed Jewish life. The Rebbe transformed Jewish life in so many ways. But I like in my mind's eye somehow Hanukkah is almost the poster child of this transformation. And the way the public menorahs have now been embraced, and you have all kinds of people from all walks of life who are putting up public menorahs, who are excited about gathering around a public menorah on Hanukkah, forgetting that only a decade or two ago they were in full opposition, and they were literally taking this to court to strike down the menorahs. I have a colleague who went on shlichut. I don't even want to tell you the name of the American city where he went. And at that time, he had a meeting with the local Reform and Conservative rabbis, who said we would not oppose Chabad coming to our city on one condition: that you sign an agreement that you will not put up a public menorah. And he had no choice. He spoke to senior leadership, and they said, "Listen, first get your foot in the door." Well, he since has been very successful there. Today, there are more than a dozen Chabad centers in that city, and many, many more menorahs that have been set up. I came up with the idea that I became friends with a fellow named John Sorello at No Frills in Center Street. This is going back 27 years. It's my first menorah. I had just come to town, and I just started my first high holiday services, and it's 1998. And I say to my new friend John, I said, John, how about we put up a No Frills, an official No Frills menorah? And he says, what's that? And the yeshiva students helped me. We built this PVC pipe menorah, yellow menorah. It looked very much like in the No Frill spirit. They have a much nicer one today. It's a permanent menorah that John put together a couple of years later. But we started lighting the menorah, first outdoors, and then we moved to lighting indoors. I was at the Olive Branch up here in Thorno, which is the largest kosher emporium in the country today. And Justin Lesnick, who's the proprietor of the Olive Branch, who had been at No Frills previously, and that's where we do menorah lighting there. We lit the menorah on the first night of Hanukkah, and there must have been 500 people. And I cannot tell you the excitement and the joy and the pride that menorah called forth. So many people came over to me and thanked me and told me how touching and how moving it was. And you know, like now it's like every night in the promenade, another synagogue is leading the menorah lightings. And we have other organizations who are almost claiming paternity. It's fantastic. I mean, it really doesn't matter who gets the credit. The important thing is that Yiddishkeit is loud, that Yiddishkeit is proud, that we are inspiring people to continue to go mechayel el choyel, from strength to strength in their observance of Jewish life, in their celebration of Jewish life, and in their pride and joy of the incredible legacy and the heritage that we have been given. And the menorah was initially conceived by our sages as being a public celebration of Yiddishkeit. It's al petach beito mibachutz is the words of the Talmud, at the door, outside, so that it be seen in the public eye. This, of course, is talking about Israel 22 centuries ago. And in the modern era, the Rebbe reimagined the public persona of Hanukkah through the distribution of thousands and thousands of menorahs, so that there won't be a Jew anywhere who's left without a menorah on Hanukkah, through probably almost 20,000 public menorahs that are being placed, and every year the number grows. I'm happy to tell you that every year I try to add at least one public menorah that I place, at least one more menorah. And we established a menorah yesterday. I was with Mayor of Vaughan, and my good friend Dr. Zeidenberg, and Chris Ainsworth was there, the council person at Cordalucci Square, and we honored Mario Cordalucci. And we have a menorah. We had placed a menorah there, and for next year it's going to be a permanent menorah sculpture, and there's going to be an annual event, a Winterfest, for the Jewish community of Vaughan, happening at Cordalucci Square. That was yesterday's Baruch Hashem achievement. Last year, when I came to the city of Vaughan, Mayor Del Duca had a small electric menorah on the podium, and I said to the mayor, I said, "What's this?" And he said to me, "Well, you know that there have been cities in Canada that canceled their menorah lighting, so I wanted our menorah lighting to be twice as profound." And I said to him, "Well,
wow.
then..."
That is so commendable.
It's tremendously commendable, and he's been a really true friend of our community. But what I said to the mayor, I said, "Well, we really should do something outdoors." And he said, "I like that idea." So we announced it together at the menorah lighting, and then a couple of months later, I'm like, "Mayor Del Duca, where's our menorah?" So my son Label and I were both a little bit artistically endowed. We collaborated, and we designed a menorah. And I'm very happy to tell you that we in the city of Vaughan have a city hall with a permanent menorah. There's a gateway sign which says Vaughan in large letters with a permanent matching menorah that the city has commissioned and built. I was there last week to reveal it, and we're going to be lighting it for the first time with God's help on Monday. And this year's scheduling makes it difficult, right? Because we're in the end of December and there's lots of other things going on. But on December 30th, we're going to be gathering at the city of Vaughan and doing this outdoor menorah lighting. I encourage all of our listeners to make the trek up to the city above Toronto and to participate in the world's first permanent city hall menorah fixture. I can't say the world's first, because probably I'm imagining to myself that somewhere in Israel there's a city hall that has a permanent menorah, but certainly outside of Israel, we are a first, and it is it's proud for us as Canadian Jews despite the disgusting anti-Semitism that is exploding in our streets and in our shopping malls, not to mention our universities, it's a proud moment for us as Canadian Jews to be starting yet something else. We started the first police menorah lightings, and this is replicated in many, many places in the United States and in Europe today, where at the law enforcement there are menorahs being placed. It started right here in York region. We're starting, Baruch Hashem, a permanent menorah at a city hall, and I am very hopeful that we will start seeing not only menorahs placed on Hanukkah, but menorah sculptures and menorahs being seen in a very public way, as it should be. We have nothing to be ashamed of. We have nothing to be embarrassed of. We have everything.
Exactly. You know what? You're so right, Rabbi Kaplan. And the fact is, when you think of it, the original Hanukkah commemorates a time of resistance. Of resistance to those who would suppress the study of Torah, the practice of Yiddishkeit, and even among our own people, there are those who chose to identify with the oppressors and fight against us. But basically, we stood out. We said, we're Jews. We're proud of it, and we're going to practice it, and nobody's going to stop us. And this is what you're doing today with all of your followers, and it's just amazing.
Listen, I'm just a little cog in a tremendous worldwide machine, the Rebbe's army. So many shluchim in so many places, each of us doing our small part. My eldest son and daughter-in-law are the shluchim in Innisfil, and the first thing they did was have a menorah placed at Innisfil City Hall, and like everywhere else in Canada today. And my daughter and my son-in-law are shluchim in Puerto Rico, in San Juan, and together with my son-in-law's parents, they lit a menorah at the legislature in San Juan, in Puerto Rico. They have a public menorah lighting there, and they're distributing menorahs to many Canadian Jews. I've already received regards from my children in Puerto Rico, where you have Canadian Jews on cruises who somehow forgot to take a menorah, but Chabad is there for them, giving them menorah. And that's just my tiny world. I share this. I share the personal part because I know that people are able to connect better when things are personalized. But really and truly, this is not personal. It's global.
Rabbi Kaplan, I'm afraid that we're out of time right now. I want to thank you so much for a very inspiring session, and I look forward to speaking to you again on Monday.
I'll look forward to that. Before I let you go, Martin, I just want to take the opportunity to mention that the Rebbe talked about menorah lightings and Shabbat candle lightings. And both really were brought to the fore in the same year. And the Rebbe said that every mitzvah is a lamp and a candle, as we say ner mitzvah. But there are two mitzvot, which are evidently candles. And there's a light, a physical light attached to them that everybody can see. And that's the Hanukkah menorah, which is lit first this evening, anytime after 3:56, but before candle lighting, which is tonight at 4:29, and Shabbat candles at 4:29 p.m. Ideally, if you have a husband-wife team, the husband should be lighting the menorah between 4 and 4:29. The mother or wife should be lighting the Shabbat candles at 4:29 p.m. in the GTA. And wherever you are, please find out the appropriate time. Let us kindle our menorahs with joy. Let us light Shabbat candles and usher in peace. And let us hope and pray. Let us hope and pray, Martin, that out of this most illuminating Hanukkah ever, marking 50 years of a global transformation, that we will finally cross the finish line and see the menorah rise again, the original menorah, in the third Beit HaMikdash, with the ushering in of the Messianic age of peace and prosperity for all of humankind, the coming of Mashiach in our time, Bimheira Ubiyameinu, Amen. Happy Hanukkah and Shabbat Shalom.
Amen. Happy Hanukkah and Shabbat Shalom.
And thank you, my friends on Facebook, for joining. Don't forget to light your menorahs and then your Shabbat candles. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.